Hi, I'm Chris from CodeReviewVideos.com, and in this video we're continuing on with the implementation of our wallpaper setup command. Okay, so as I mentioned, what we're going to do is we're going to glob this directory for all the contents of our image files, and to do that we need the path to this images directory. Now we could hard code this, and if I do, it sort of goes back to the regex situation that I was talking about earlier. If I do it for me, it works fine for me, but when you're doing it in your project, it's not going to quite work the same. So you'd need to figure out what the full path is to this directory. And that's a bit lame, to be honest. Symfony already offers us a solution to this. And depending on which version of Symfony you're using, we're using 3.2. And in just a couple of days as a time of recording, I think as of next Wednesday, Symfony 3.3 will be out. And that offers a slightly different solution to this problem. It actually offers a better solution to this problem. What we need to do is we need to inject a special global variable that's provided by Symfony, which is called the kernel.root_dir. And what that does is it gives us a known path to the location of app kernel. So in our case, as you can see at the top, my full path is actually users shared development wallpaper, and app kernel lives inside app kernel. So it'd be users shared development wallpaper app would be the outcome of Symfony resolving our kernel.rootdir parameter, which means, unfortunately, that when you use this variable, you need to go up a directory to get back to the root. So typically you would see this as kernel.rootdir and then dot slash dot dot and then another slash, and then say you wanted the source directory, you would then go to the source directory. So it's really this part here that's not very intuitive or beginner friendly. Unless you're a sort of Unixy boffin, then you're going to have some sort of confusion there the first few times that you see this. So Symfony 3.3 offers a solution to this. They've got this new variable called the project_dir, which actually just goes to the root, or sort of depending on where your location of your composer.json file is. So if you've moved the composer JSON file, there is a way around redirecting it back to the root. I will show you in the show notes how to do that. But as we're using Symfony 3.2 anyway, we're going to have to go with kernel root dir. So again, inside the show notes, this is explained a little bit more thoroughly with a slightly alternative approach for Symfony 3.3 included, or Symfony 3.3 onwards. So knowing that this parameter exists, and the fact that it's a parameter is quite important, we can go inside our services.yaml and we can add an argument, even though we're going to use the plural arguments key under here, and we can say we want to inject %% kernel.root_dir. So if you're unsure, anything that's wrapped in percentages like that indicates that this will be a parameter. So we can use that same convention to pull stuff out of our own parameters YAML. Say we wanted the mailer host, we could use the exact same convention to inject it in that way. We don't want the mailer host, so I'm going to get rid of that. Once we've used this arguments key, what this is going to do is going to pass whatever we put in here as arguments into our constructor. We don't have a constructor, but we can easily create one. So I'm going to do a public function _construct. And we know now that we're going to get a string because it's our parameter, and our parameter is going to be our root dir. Now it's given me a bit of a warning there because I'm using a scalar type hint, in other words, telling it that this is going to be a string, and for whatever reason this, I believe, is just set to PHP 5.6 inside PHP Storm. That's an IDE issue, it's nothing to do with my project, so I'm just going to completely disregard that. There's plenty of videos on Code Review about how to use PHP 7.1. Anyway, we'll go to initialize fields, let it create that for the root dir, that's good. So what we can do now is create a new variable, which we're going to call wallpapers, which is going to be equal to the output of glob. And then we need, as it says, to pass in a pattern. And the pattern is the path to the directory, along with some information on the type of files that we want to try and glob for, or find, basically. So we're going to say this root dir, which is going to point, remember, to this path. And then we need to add the slash, go up a directory. So from here, we need to go back to the root. And then we live inside the web images directory, web/images, and then we want to find literally anything, any file name, any file extension, so any file name dot any file extension, and there we go, that's our glob pattern. Now to be absolutely clear here, what I can do is use doctrine debug dump to dump out the content of wallpapers, and we'll run app setup wallpapers, and ho I've forgotten to call parent construct, so sometimes it is preferable to read the manual. Anyway, you can see there, these are all the image paths in full, including that upper directory to our images. So knowing that we've got 22, remember we're at 0 indexed, so 21 down to 0. We can go through and loop over each of these results. So we could say for each, and then we'll say for each wallpapers as wallpaper, And then rather than overwrite the wallpaper variable, what I'll do is I'll just say WP, so wallpaper. I'm going to create a new wallpaper in here. And the reason I'm wrapping that in brackets there is to make this a sort of a one-liner. So I'm going to say set the file name. And this file name is going to be a bit messy because it's going to be that full path, and that's not really what we want. But for the moment, we'll just say that it is what we want. And we'll come back and clean it up in a minute. And we'll set the slug to be also that long path. And the reason that we're doing that as opposed to just sort of faking it is that the slug needs to be unique, but we don't have any constraints on it to say that it actually has to be a proper slug at the moment. So that'll be good enough. But we do know that the width is going to be 1920, and we do know that the height is going to be 1080. And the reason that I do know that is because when I was going ahead and getting the wallpapers from Google, those were the exact image dimensions that I specified. Of course, they may not be the exact image dimensions that you specified, but we'll come to that in a sec. And now that I've got an entity, I want to go ahead and save it. So how do I do that? Well, I've got to use the entity manager, and we're going to have to persist it. How do we get access to the entity manager? In exactly the same way that we got access to the root DIR. So I might as well do it the other way around to begin with now. We'll say that we want the entity manager or something implementing entity manager interface. And I'll initialize those fields. Then I'll jump into my services.yaml and I will add in the service. And if you're unsure, you can do a PHP bin console debug container. And this will probably blow up because I've just broken my service definition, but we could do doctrine here. And you can see it's giving me the error because of the way I've done this sort of a crazy way around to illustrate that point. So maybe we just get rid of that for the moment. Get rid of that for the moment. Comment that bit out. Try again. You can see some output for doctrine, which is actually not what I want. I want entity instead. And you can see you've got a bunch of different ones. I want the entity manager. I'm just going to select number 5. You can see this is a service alias for doctrine ORM. Default entity manager, which is fine. What I'm going to do now is get rid of that. And then because it's a service, I'm going to use the at instead of the percentage. And we only need the at as a prefix, not also as a suffix. So we can see at doctrine ORM default entity manager. Now, in truth, it's easier to use the Symfony PHP Storm extension or the plugin, as that will give you autocomplete on your services and stuff. So it makes it more simple to do that. Again, got a video on that on the site already. Not got it enabled in this project. But once I'm injecting that, that's the entity manager or something that implements the entity manager interface, I can bring that in and I can immediately start using it. And so what I'll do is now that I've got that entity, I'll say this em persist, and we'll persist WP, which is our wallpaper. And we'll do that for each of the wallpapers that are in our globbed output, but simply persisting them is not going to save them. It's just going to set them as rows to be inserted into the appropriate table when we next flush those changes. So it's going to basically add them to the next change set, and to actually apply that change set, we need to call this em flush. Now call that outside the loop. So we go through each one and add it to the change set. And finally, we flush that change set because that's the expensive piece, really. We're just saying add this to the stack of things to do, add this to our next unit of work. And then once we've gathered together all the stuff that we want to do, then actually go ahead and do it, which makes it a lot more efficient. So that's why the flush is called outside the loop. Now the truth is, on a scale of this, if you put the flush inside the loop, you would notice almost no difference, but don't get into bad habits to begin with. Anyway, let's try and run our command again, php bin console app. We don't need to put the full command in, as we saw earlier. That would probably do. I'm just going to call app set. You see command result. It's not really telling us very much, but if we look inside our database now, we can see we've got a bunch of junk, but at least it's populated.